go.
Hey, welcome to the First Layer. This is Ask for Help, the show that answers your questions live every Sunday afternoon at 12, just like we are today. Happy New Year to everybody. With me is, as always, is my great co-host, Brian Baker.
Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. Happy holidays. I don't know, Festivus for the rest of us. It's all over. We made it. We made it. Clap for everybody. We made it through 2020. And then cue the very delayed sound effect.
Yeah. Yay! Yay! I didn't actually hit the sound effect. We'll do a Muppet one. Yay! So we've got some people to say hello to, but before we do that, I want to let you know that if you're new here, if this is your first time on our live stream, type into the chat that you're new and tell us where you're from. And if you are new here, welcome. We do this every Sunday at noon in 2021. This is our new time slot for 2021. You'll see us every Sunday at noon, either both of us or one of us, either me or Brian. We haven't decided which, but mostly it'll be both of us.
Social life on Sundays.
Yeah, exactly. So, Brian, go ahead and say hello to the fine folks today because you've got the list.
Absolutely. Hello to 3D Make It and DJ Minima. I think I'm getting that right. You let me know. Ben Brady, myself, Don McFersetto. I saw your comment about the filler dryer. Thank you for that. Dan Vejlin, hopefully I got that right. Joseph Jolly, Matt, Peter Reynolds, Robert 954, Sheldon Grant. I think I'm seeing a few pop in here. Robert Marvin. Unfortunately, the list dynamically updates alphabetical order, so I got to bounce back a bit. David Sell, 3D Obsession, Matt. Oh man, this list is growing. Thank you everybody for joining. Sorry if I missed any of you. You let me know, and I will make sure to catch you and give you a shout out.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us today. We're going to kick things off right for 2021. We're going to start by answering a question that we've got up on the screen right now. Everybody give a big thumbs up or a clap for my lovely wife Jerry, who is running our chat today, and she is bringing all of your comments up here on screen. So, have you owned a Labist ET4? If so, is it a good printer for beginners? And does it hold up in the long term? This is from TSWG, the Rocket program. Personally, I have not. I don't even know the brand name.
Yeah, I've heard this one too. I'm going to take a look at it.
Yeah.
269 here. Oh, it is. Okay, I sure hope that's the actual colors, but I assume it's fill lights. Let me switch over to this. Look at the colors on that thing. It's a shame that I know that that's a purple fill light and a blue fill light. If it was anodized like that, I would buy it in a heartbeat just for the colors. It looks like, let's see, what's that build volume on that? Where are you hiding the good info here? This looks like a Kickstarter. That always worries me. Frustrated. Can anyone help? That's a great first comment to see. I'm going to assume that looks like a 235 by 235, but it might be a 310. Either way, for that price point, if it's the size of an Ender 3, I don't think it's worthwhile to buy into, because we always say the Ender 3 is the best go-to printer for beginners. If it's the size of a CR-10 at that price point, which probably comes in around 400 Canadian, it's fairly competitive. And also, 40% off code. I wonder if you can stack that on top of that, in which case that might actually be a wicked deal. That being said, we haven't worked with any of their machines, so we can't vouch on the reliability. But looking at the frame and looking at a lot of the design features, it does appear to be a good unit. Now, the only thing I would watch for with these is what's underneath that fan shroud. If you're looking at buying a system like this, you need to know what the hot end is, because you need to know if you can get parts. And given that we haven't even heard of Labis, if it's not off-the-shelf parts, you're going to have a tough time.
Yep, I agree 100% on that.
And that's my ramble.
Hey, we've got Jan Vejlin, or Vajlin. He says he's new
the J
from
would be
Denmark.
silent, I believe.
Valen? Jan Valen.
Jan Valen. Or
And
Jan
you from
Valen.
Denmark.
You let us know.
Welcome from
That
Denmark.
would definitely be a Jan, though. It's Denmark.
Denmark would be Jan?
Yeah, it would be Jan.
Yeah, it would be Jan. Well, welcome from Denmark.
Welcome.
Glad you're awake and with us on Sunday afternoon. Hi from Minnesota, David Sell. Hello, David Sell from Minnesota.
Happy New Year. You've been with us for quite a long time.
Yes.
It's lovely to see you here every week. We appreciate it.
Robert from SoCal, South California. Hello, Robert. Happy New Year to everybody. My wife is right. Jan just said my wife is right. The J is silent.
Oh,
there
great.
we go.
Start off the year with Jerry being right. We're in trouble now.
That means it's a good year, fellas.
It's a good luck one.
So we've got a bunch of questions that have come in over the last couple of weeks that we haven't answered, and I do apologize for that because it's been the holidays, right? And we came back early. We were actually scheduled to come back next week. We will have a brand new episode for you next Saturday, which will be dropping at 9 a.m. Smash that like button, Dan Adams. I'm also going to throw this up. Don't forget to subscribe if you are new here and you get some value out of what we're doing today. Speaking of value, if you do get some value out of your questions today, if we answered it to your satisfaction, don't be afraid to hit that little $sign at the bottom. That's called a super chat. And it just goes to helping out the channel overall. And we do appreciate your help. It's not mandatory, but every extra dollar helps to keeping things going around here. So let's get right into it. Our first question, I think we answered this a couple of weeks ago, but it somehow made it into today's document. It's from Pedro Ballester. He said, could you cover prevention of printer fires? And I think we covered that a couple of weeks ago. And just to reiterate what we were talking about, fires happen when electronics break down. And how that can happen is, first of all, your thermistor. If it's not working, your heater cartridge can heat up a lot. And if that heats up and it keeps heating, sometimes in the firmware, there's a section that is for prevention of this problem, so that if the thermistor were to break or go out on you, it wouldn't heat. It would give you a temp error, either on the bed or on the nozzle. Now, if it's not turned on, and some newer companies still don't turn that on. Some older companies still don't turn that on. But the majority do.
Yeah, they're getting better at it. The fact is they used to never do it because they were too lazy to actually tune the unit and find out what we call in the industrial control world the rate of rise on a temperature, and so they just chose to disable it. The best analogy I can give you is, let's say you have a furnace, a nice old school furnace, where you have a contact wire that says turn on the furnace, and inside it's got that little metal coil that changes its size based off the temperature, and eventually it shorts out to say it's warm enough and shuts off the furnace. So if you pull that whole thing out and you just jumper those two wires together and you tell the furnace to run gung-ho, what will stop the furnace? And the answer is pretty much breaking that wiring in, and that's what a thermal runaway is. A thermal runaway is when the printer doesn't know it's being told to heat, it's not being told to stop heating, and a thermistor, or the heating a cartridge itself, is not an intelligent element. It will keep going until its wires physically melt off. So we never say here that printer fires are impossible. But the fact is, there is always a risk with any device that generates heat of causing a fire. There are preventative measures in there, and if you want to implement additional measures, that is up to you. But it's not an imminent danger. It's not something that's guaranteed to happen, and in fact, it is very rare. Across maybe 4 or 5 years here, we've seen a total of 3 printer fires, all of which were ironically one product that we won't mention because we do want to work with that vendor sometime in the future.
Yes.
But if you Google it, you will find out.
Yeah.
And since they have actually imposed the thermal runaway protection in most of their firmwares, it's mostly mitigated because that's your biggest risk, is a thermal runaway causing a fire if it didn't have that protection.
Yes, exactly. And that's really the only way you can start a fire on a 3D printer, is if you've got bad wiring. Let's just break it right down. If you got bad wiring, you could potentially have a fire. If you are doing your own maintenance on your printer and you're adding new boards, let's say you're going to put in one of those and you don't really understand how to do it, consult somebody who does. Take pictures, lots of pictures. We all live in an age now where we have a cell phone that has a camera on it. Doesn't have to be the highest quality, but get some good pictures of where all the wires were routed on the original board before you go ahead and swap it to the new board. Okay.
Even better, buy a bunch of colored electrical tape and wrap your wires if you're unsure, because there are ones that have common coloring. And the most common one I've seen, believe it or not, is people hooking up their thermistor to where the heating cartridge should go and vice versa. And I've seen the beds heat indefinitely, even with the E3 board swaps. I had a guy recently who couldn't figure out why his bed was heating up the moment he plugged it in. Turns out he had wired the 2 heater cartridge wires direct into the pass-through power port instead of the actual one that drives the bed. So things happen. It's just a matter of, if you don't have any photos and you don't have any labels, what do you have to go back on? People on the internet? We found during that day that Creality's drawing was actually wrong. So
yeah,
exactly. Take photos.
So Brian's got his question of the day up there. What are you printing? Is it on a new 3D printer that maybe you got for Christmas, or your old trustworthy printer? Let us know in the chat today what's going on your printers today. If you're not printing anything, that's okay. You don't have to print every day, but let us know what you got for Christmas. If you've got new parts, you've got a new printer, whatever you may have had, we'd love to know. Our next question here comes from Doug C. He says, I'm ready to pull the trigger on a new 3D printer, coming from a FlashForge Finder, which has been great for the past 4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
That's probably the first good testimonial I've heard on one of those machines.
Well, I've been using a FlashForge Creator Max.
Well, the creators are great, but the Finder was like the budget one, right? The $300 one, if I recall. Yeah. And I always saw them available for sale on Kijiji here. So I don't know. Take it with a grain of salt.
So he says, I've narrowed it down to the CR-10S Pro V2 and the Anycubic Chiron. Both have pros and cons. The CR-10S Pro looks to have better components and is an extra $130 despite the small build area. Worth it? Your thoughts? Well, here's my... First and foremost, I would say that the Chiron, I would stay away from the Chiron because if I'm not mistaken, the Chiron is a Delta printer or Delta style printer.
No, this is the one that's the CR10 clone, and I use that term loosely because of just the way it looks here. I'll pull it up on my screen here.
All right.
So we can take a look at it while you chat about it. But this is 400 by 400 by 450. I mean, it does have a bigger build volume than the CR10. Now, that being said, The only thing I get a little nervous about is it does look very minimalistic, and so you might get vibration issues with a frame that simple. You can
Yes.
see my concern when I design printers is take a look at how high that leg is from the frame. So what you can see is you got 20/20 extrusion all the way around, and then you've got what looks to be at least a 40 or 50 mil leg to lift it high enough so that the power supply can sit underneath. Now that's going to create a high center of gravity. And basically, when you have a moving bed of that size that moves forward and back like this, those legs have to absorb that movement, and you may have to lower the acceleration. Now, I haven't played with one of these machines, so I don't know if it's been tuned differently, but if I assume it's tuned like a CR-10 with a 500 mil acceleration and a jerk of around 8 to 10, it will cause a lot of chassis vibration, notably when you're printing on the higher parts, because if you've ever seen an earthquake, you'll know that the top part is always going to lag the motion direction of what's at the base, and so you may get a lot of vibration at the top. Otherwise, honestly, it doesn't look like that bad of a machine, and if you can get it for $369 US, which I think is around 500 Canadian,
Yes.
that's a very competitive price for that build volume. Now, that being said, the cable chain idea is fantastic. The hot end looks kind of hacked together. I don't know if that's enough airflow on that fan, but it's all enclosed. So if you have to change that blower fan, you got to take off this whole cover. And then, of course, it feeds from the right, which is a little unusual. So you'll actually keep your filament roll on the right-hand side of the machine, unlike Creality that's on the other side. But if any of you have a Chiron there, let us know in the chat what your experiences are with it, because, yeah, we haven't struck a deal with any Cubic on review units yet, as far as I know.
3D Make It says it's loud fan-wise, so...
Yeah, and most of them are. I mean, if you guys are comfortable with changing out fans and you know the specs, this is something we don't talk about often, but for instance, a front fan on your extruder is usually a 40 mil by 40 mil by 10 mil thickness. You can go onto a site like DigiKey, Mauser, there's a ton of electronic sites, and you can get a good quality ball bearing fan that is a fit-in replacement. You will just need to crimp your own power connector so it syncs up with your other cable, and
Correct.
that will reduce sound significantly. I think we haven't said this in the past year. We don't advise putting a Noctua fan on the cooling of the hot end, just purely because even though they're quieter, they're actually a result of a reduction in the CFM, the cubic feet per minute airflow of a regular ball bearing fan. Last time I checked, it was about 30 to 40% less airflow, and the problem is then you're going to start getting heat creep, and it's really a toss-up. There are some machines that do fine with it, and there's other ones that clog indefinitely. Mine actually jammed up. I think I've still got it sitting beside the machine back here. It hasn't, it just died on me, and we didn't know until it really went bad. So
Pab TV is asking, joining filament advice. My advice to you on joining filaments, you're going to need the proper hardware to do it. It's not as easy as taking a match and putting two pieces of PLA together, using your fingers to try and get it to the right thickness. You are going to need a product very much like the Palette or the Palette 2 Pro from Mosaic.
yeah,
That will join your filaments correctly. It will also give you the ability to have up to 4 filaments that you can interweave with one another if you have a multicolor model.
Yeah, they've got this this new thing that I haven't really played with these, and they take about 2.5 months to get here. These are kind of new on the market in the past 6 months or so. These filament joining mechanisms where you can go and feed filament into there and then heat up a certain point to weld it together. But you're going to be bound on the tolerance of that hole. That's going to be the big one. The other thing to remember too with these products, if you look at, there's ways you can just create a weld in between, but you got to make sure that your filament diameter itself actually matches up correctly. Now, yeah, you can spend $20 Canadian on this. You can experiment with it. You can fight to the end. But why do you want to weld a reel together? And that's what we want to get right back to is if you have a filament runout sensor like the smart sensor behind me, like the Triangle Labs filament sensor that I see questions popping up in the chat about, if you have that And as well, if your firmware is configured for a runout sensor, you can actually issue pauses in your G-code and filament changes and just do the change out yourself. It's going to be way easier than spending your time to weld this and to make sure that it still passes through your Bowden tube and to make sure that the filament on either side of that weld didn't swell as a result of your melting. It's a slippery slope. I think you're going to have more difficulties with it than successes.
I agree with you 100% on that. For me, I just rather go with a proper setup and do it right the first time. And at the end of the day, do I really need to take my filaments and weld them together? No. If I have leftover filaments that aren't going to do a cube or some kind of project, I'll use those in a 3D printer pen. And we're going to talk about 3D printer pens later on. We've got a whole show coming up on 3D printer pens because both Brian and I have them. What are they good for? What can you do with them? And there's a ton of stuff that you can do with them, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode on our regular show. Now, let me just go and as there's a question here. Would you, from Pedro Ballester, he says, would you have any comments on this Thingiverse item? Brian, you can't pull it up.
Give me the number there, and
the number is 2148191.
All right, once more there. Sorry, the page was slow to load because it's Thingiverse.
2148191.
19 on, not 151. Just make sure it's not something very vulgar, because
no, it's not.
No. What on? Why?
Okay,
No.
I was on the right picture.
There's definitely better ways to do this. And I think what we're going to do, Brian, later in the year is we'll put our noggins together and see if we can't come up with a much better solution to what this is.
Yeah, okay, so for those
Okay,
who,
so for the lay person, what is this? Is some kind of thing they've rigged up so that their printer won't start on fire?
Yeah, so what we've got here is, you can see there's the top cable here is powered a 3D printer. That's your main 120 volts or 240 volts, depending on where you are in the world. You can see they've got a 3.3 volt power brick, a 5 volt power brick, and some loop backs to the shut-off control with IoT, which is Internet of Things Relay, which means it's a smart power outlet, but it has this main thing. What you're looking at here is this shut-off control cable, and what this is doing, this whole cluster of wires, is the smoke detector is powered from the IoT relay, if you will. It's powered from the power bar. And then the contacts within the smoke detector, because the smoke detector has a discrete switch that switches on or off depending on if there is smoke. I don't know the specific model, so I'm not going to guess. But what happens is whenever it detects smoke, it sends a signal down the line through the little diode connector into the shutoff control and cuts power to the power bar. Now, don't get me wrong, this will work. It's just hideous and unnecessary. What I would do myself, you can actually get smoke detectors that have electrical contacts on it. And if you really want to go somewhere this route, what you want to get is a 24 volt smoke detector. Because everyone, I assume, you have a 24 volt smoke detector. These are industrial controls, so they're not going to be the cheapest in the world. Actually, they're not too bad here. 4-wire with interconnects. And what you want to do is you want to get this with a relay and have it cut off the power to your printer board, but keep the power supply alive. And the reason you want to do that is because you want the smoke detector to interlock it and keep it dead until you get home, so you know that's why it's shut off. We'll kind of go a bit more into depth in this year, but I try to avoid it because I don't want to scare tactic you guys. That I don't want you to think that this is a necessity. You know, this is something that you would want to have wired into a facility where you had 10 or 15 printers, where one catches fire and you want to kill the rest of them, right? You want to isolate it down. Is it really necessary for one printer? Guys, I've been running printers that should have caught fire and never caught fire. The thing I understand with a 3D printer is if you're worried about fire, you need to do a little bit more reading into electrical theory. and I think it'll bring you a bit more comfort in knowing that DC power is really safe to work with as a human, and that the current required from a device only pulls the power that it requires, not how much the power supply says it can deliver. There's a bunch of things that will help ease your concerns over this. We still do recommend new people, especially with new printers, is the first few prints, be around to observe it. You know, give it 3-4 hours, be in the vicinity just to ease your concerns. My printers, they're running 6 to 11 days consistently printing, and there's no fire concerns. There used to be thermal runaways because the wire's moving around quite a bit, but be smart. Don't overreact. However, if you feel you need that peace of mind, there are routes to go.
Okay, Zombie Printing, he says, hi, purchased a Mega Zero 2.0 on a previous vid. You said you used Cura profile. Was it just the straight profile or was it tweaked? The Yoda head looked great. What I did there on the Mega Zero, because we only use that one now strictly for TPU and TPE, because it just prints them so great. What we did was we just basically took any cubic printer, the one that we could find, and we just changed the size of the bed, and we checked off that there was no heated bed. So once that was done, once that was done, we just started using the profile for generic TPU, and it works great. Same thing, generic PLA. If you're going to print PLA on it, you are going to have to put down some sort of glue or adhesion method, because it just doesn't really hold on to PLA as well as it should. With the difference that PLA has been making over the last couple of years, the chemistry involved in making PLA, they're not like they used to be. Most PLAs today will tell you that you do need a heated bed for them. A lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but I always print with a heated bed when I print PLA. So printing with PLA is the best way, or having a heated bed when you're printing PLA is the best way to do it. But if you're going to do it without a heated bed, put down a little bit of glue, use glue stick. The Elmer's purple glue stick is what we use around here, and we really, really like that, and it works great. It works great on if you're not going to heat the bed.
Yeah, and I've been playing with PLAs in the past week that even with the nozzle at 220, it won't bind to a PEI sheet unless it's heated up there.
All right, so let's get on to another question here. I'm sure there's a couple that are coming in that Jerry's watching over there. This one from Daramo 50. What's the best way to prevent brittle prints in silk PLA? First and foremost,
brittleness is usually humidity, isn't it?
It is. This is some silk PLA. This is from Arion. This is probably my favorite silk right now. I've used their stuff for a while, and as you guys know, for anybody that's interested, I'll do a little plug here. We now are affiliates of Arion, so I did put a link over on our Facebook page. So if you're interested in buying some Arion, getting it right from the factory, please use our link. It helps out the show. But silk PLA, the one thing that I've noticed, if it's brittle, it's because you've got too much moisture in it. If your print is brittle, and you should be hearing like almost a little sizzling or a popping sound if you listen to your printer when you're printing with this stuff, or silk in general, if that's happening, you've got too much moisture in it, you're going to have to dry it out. Okay? All right, so back to our letters and emails.
Yes.
Carl Ball, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying go ahead with Carl's email.
Carl Ball is asking, I'm trying to upgrade my CR-10S S5 to Marlin 2.0, and the M-stops are working with M119, but the firmware doesn't stop the motors. Any ideas? Brian, I'm going to let you tackle this one.
That's a good question. Why would that happen there? The end stops themselves is just a discrete switch, right? So in the on the Creality builds, the way I've seen it is they're all on pull-up lines, and when you connect the end stop, it actually zeroes out the bus line. So it's entirely possible that they're inverted. So you may want to look down to the invert X, I believe it's invert X end stop or X end stop inverting. Let me look it up in my Marlin version real quick here. But look up inverting, and I believe the Creality ones are all backwards. So you may want to just flip the state so that it says 0 means it's hit the end stop. If we look it up here, and they are still the original end stops, I hope. Inverting. There we go. There's a whole section here for these. If I go over to... There we are. Yeah, so in configuration.h, mechanical end stops, with COM to ground and NC to signal uses false here. And they say here, whoops, good job, platform. I will slowly updating it. Most common setup, not connected to signal uses false here. So if you are finding that it's backwards, for instance, now in your state, it sounds like it's not actually receiving the signal. So you're able to crash it right into the end stop. So M119, for those of you who don't know, is a great little command here. Of course, we're going to get howitzers. M119 Marlin. Make sure to add Marlin whenever you're searching this stuff. So it reports the end stop state. So what you should see is you should see open when it's resting, and then hold it down and press M119 again and make sure it says triggered. And then if that's the case, then you know that homing is going to bump into there successfully. If it's still crashing, you might want to check and make sure your carriage is actually running into that end stop. So that's basically my good checks there.
There you go. Any new questions from our chat there, Jerry?
Pab TV, any updates on the Triangle Lab filament sensor? It's working great. No changes.
Yeah, I haven't installed mine yet.
Nothing to it, so it's pretty
still
basic
right
switch. Here. Yeah, you know, they are good. The only thing I wish manufacturers would provide now is provide versions with the DuPont connectors on there instead of the black ones, because it's really a pain for a lot of people that don't work with them. You know, you have to go and cut them, you have to crimp them again. I have them sitting in my machine, and the problem is you blow the wrong way and they fall out. So apart from that, it has been a great filament runout sensor.
Okay, let me just pull this up here. So here's the Triangle Lab sensor. You can see here that it has a little bit bigger of a switch, and it has a roller ball on that switch. So when your filament goes in, it goes across that roller ball or that roller, depressing the tang here right onto the switch and giving you your signal. Now, you'll notice that they've got two pin outs here, or one is a pin out, one is a pin in, or set in, one set out. So you can actually have more than one of these hooked up on your system. Not that you would want to, but I don't see where it would make any difference to have one or two. But
if you had multiple filament feeds, if you had dual filaments, you can actually daisy chain them.
That's actually good thought right there. I never even thought about that. But Triangle Labs,
we don't do that on our machine, so
yeah, we don't do that very much. We love their products. You know, they've done really well for us, and we've never really had any problems. Brian, you've used them a little bit more than I have. As you can see, I haven't even installed mine.
Yeah, they're all fine. I mean, I know they've received some flack before for making what we'll call clone products. I wouldn't say they're a direct rip-off or a copy, but they are clone styles. And my favorite hot end, I believe, was, it is made by them. It's not cheap, but best hot end I got on my machines, I'll just switch over and show you guys, is this bad boy here, the Triangle Lab Dragon. And I know there's been a lot of feedback of, it's a rip-off of Mosquito. It is a little different than Mosquito, and the biggest thing is this barrel cooler here is actually an E3D V6 drop-in replacement. So as you can see, it looks like an E3D hot end, but with that heat shroud in there, it has the flow rates of a Volcano in the same profile size. So this high flow version, the one that I have on two of my machines here, you can see on the high flow version, it's just insulated with ceramics to keep it warmer for a longer distance. And so it melts way cleaner, and it's a drop-in replacement for the V6. It is a stellar hot end, but it is a little steep price for some people at 104 Canadian for the high flow version. I haven't done my review on it yet because I've been lazy, frankly, but it does work. It is my go-to TPU TPE nozzle on my CR-10 behind me here, and on my main machine with a 0.6 nozzle, that's my high flow.
So Trevor Rickards got a question for us, and he says, what does it mean when I print one model and it comes out very clean, no layer lines, but then I print a different model and I can see layer lines all through it and it's the same PLA? It's not the fault of the material so much as the fault of the geometry of the model that you're doing.
Yeah, what you got to watch for, and you know, sometimes those models with high geometry do actually expose issues with your printer that's blended out by other ones, but you could be seeing micro amounts of Z rod binding. You could be seeing that it's trying to move the Z too fast and there's vibration, especially if you have an ABL sensor and it's trying to compensate for a bed. The more geometry, the more vertical moves it needs to do, and the less likely you're actually going to hit that same position on a micro step that you would previously. So my first rule of thumb, if you start seeing stuff like that early on, try just slowing down the print. Slow it down to 75%, 70%. Let it run for a bit and see if the lines persist. And if they do, you might determine if the job's worth keep going or if it's worth canceling it. You can also try dropping the temperature a little bit, because sometimes the filament, when it's at a cooler state, it absorbs those changes a little bit differently versus in a liquid state where it shows it much more aggressively. I've seen that on a few printers of mine, but it just comes down to, yeah, it's the geometry of the model. And also, it might be a good time to review and polish in those slicer settings and see if there's anything you can do to buff it up.
Question about BLTouch. I have an Ender 3 V2 and added a BLTouch with the Smith 3D firmware. When I run the bed stabilizer and OctoPrint, it seems to come back with different measurements each time. And I will tell you exactly why that's happening. Because every time your bed heats up, it actually doesn't heat up the same way each time, because that bed is aluminum. Aluminum, the molecules, when they're heated in aluminum, will actually change direction, if you will, for the way that they heated up from the last time. So your bed is always going to be out on that BLTouch, and it's always going to be a little bit different every time that you do it. The way to combat that is get it as close as you can on the four corners. Don't worry about the center. Get it as close as you can on the four corners. Once you've done that, then leave it alone. Don't touch it. Just heat it up each time and let your sensor do the work for you. Have at least 9 points of contact, so that would be three by 3 lines. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. On a bed the size of an Ender 3, 9 is pretty sufficient. You can go higher if you want, but I usually only do 9, because the more points you probe, the longer it takes to do that probe. Although it's more accurate when it probes more times, the problem is that the memory on these boards can only hold so much information. And the more that you probe, that's a lot of data that you've added to this board. So your throughput from the SD card to the actual printer from the board, that has a much smaller place to load in its commands, as it were, or its code. So your print, it could fail at that point. It'd give you an out of memory error and you wonder why you've got out of memory, and that usually is, or you get a buffering error, and I've seen it before on other 3D printers. So usually 9 points of contact for measuring on something like a CR or an Ender 3 is more than sufficient. Brian?
Yes, and one thing I was going to show here, wow, I'm actually surprised I was able to find that. For those of you who have a BLTouch or any ABL sensor and are okay with modifying your firmware, this is a must-do. This is a guaranteed, you need to have this in your firmware. It's going to make your life a million times better. And this is called Z-Min Probe Repeatability Test. It's located around a line. In this version of 2.072, it's line 1042 of configuration.h. You want to enable this command. And what this does, if we pull it up here, is probes, what it does is it hits one point on your bed and goes and probes up and down, back and forth on the same point, and then tells you how the biggest deviation from the closest reading to the furthest reading. Now, what that means is it tests average and it goes down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. And then, once it's done that, it goes and says, this is how far down the probe had to go on time 1, time 2, time 3, and it says, what's the smallest number, what's the biggest number, what's the range in between. And that gets us the deviation. And luckily enough, I actually have a photo here of what the result is. Admittedly, it is sideways. I think with Google I can rotate it. I can't remember. Ah, there we go. Rotate me away, Google. Woohoo! Okay, let's get the... Sorry, this is not... Oh, 45, okay. Okay, now my phone's yelling at me. So what you see here is this deviation number. Sorry it's sideways, guys. But what this tells me here, this deviation tells me every time... Okay, apparently Google's fighting with me here. Apparently, the deviation on this particular probe cycle of 10 probes was 0.001 millimeters. So that's pretty much, I think, the accuracy of the stepper itself. And so what that means is whenever the bed probes, it guarantees that the probe is going to every time be within 0.001 of the actual measurement on the bed. If you run this test and you see something like 0.45, 0.2, think of it like a nozzle height, right? So if you're at 0.2, you might have to baby step 0.2 millimeters up or down every print to get that bed leveling accurate. So if you're getting readings all over the map, enabling this test will tell you if your BLTouch settings need to be adjusted. In my case, I had one that was 0.45 because the BLTouch wires were coming within close proximity of the heater cartridge, and the cycling of the cartridge on and off sent a pulse down the line that it mistakenly said was reading the bed. So this is the test you want to have on your printer to make sure that your probe is calibrated. And if your probe is calibrated and it's coming in wonky every time, then you're actually seeing deformations of your bed every single cycle. And we do see it with heating up. We always recommend you probe your bed when heated. And there are features within Marlin if you are finding your probe accuracy is getting all whacked out of whack when you're probing, such as turning off the heaters and turning off all heaters and fans when it's going down to press the bed to make sure there's no electrical interference.
There you are. So here we got a question from Tom Taylor. He says, on my end stop, I thought it was crashing into the end stop on the X gantry, but it turned out to be I had the belt too tight. It would not let the carriage go all the way to the end stop. And that is something that, you know, when we did the live build here a couple Saturdays ago or Saturday ago,
Saturday. It's been
last Sunday, a week ago, when we did the build on this new printer that we've got behind me, which is the Mingda Rock 3. I had to look at it because so many printers in my head right now. We kind of showed you a little bit about how tight those should be. And usually when they come from the factory, they're tight enough. Sometimes their screws may come loose and they may slip and slop. What I have found is if you take the biggest Allen key wrench that you get with your set and you put it down between that roller at the end, or that bearing that's at the end of the X gantry, and the actual extrusion on the X gantry, that will be a good starting point for getting your belt as tight as it needs to be. Over tightening will jam things up. It'll cause things to slip, and you won't get the best print. So it's really, you ride a fine line. And my experience has shown me that if you just use the biggest Allen key that you get in your set and drive it down in there and then retighten those screws, you should be right in the ballpark for a good quality print on the X gantry axis.
I just want to have a note here because Tom Taylor was saying I've upgraded screw adjusters on mine. I'm on the fence about these because it's true. You can dial in your belt tension to be absolutely perfect. However, if your tension is not right on the screw, with vibration and movement of the belt over time, it actually can loosen those. And so, if you really feel like you've got the direct torque or the tension correctly and you're not going to be touching it for a while, it doesn't hurt to add a little bit of Loctite blue, not the red one, the Loctite blue to it, just to provide that extra resistance so that the screw can't loosen over time with the movement. Loctite blue, you may see it if you ever take apart a laptop that you buy. You may see a little bit of blue wrapping around the thread, and it's designed, the blue is designed to be removable, but to provide some tension. If you go to the red, it's akin to welding. You're never going to get that screw out again. So get yourself some Loctite blue, drip a little bit of it on the screw with the tension, get a little bit of it on the threads there, get it to the right tension, and then just set it and forget it. If you have the original mounts for your belt, you can always loosen off the 2 screws that hold the T-nuts in your extrusion. You have to hold it tight, and then you really have to torque it in. It's kind of a pain, but then it's also a set it and forget it.
All right, so we've got a question here from Dwayne King. He says, I'm using a Cura 4.70. First and foremost, I'm going to tell you, Dwayne, you want to update that to the latest version. He says,
Cura 4.7 is chunk.
Yeah, he says, when I abort a print, the nozzle just stops in place. Is there any way I can have the nozzle move to a position of my choosing when I hit the abort print button? P.S. I hit the abort print button a lot. Well, first and foremost, let's get you to stop hitting the abort button.
Yeah.
And depending on the machine that you're running, it is a line, I believe it's G code that goes into your start and end G code, so that if you do hit abort, I believe it goes into the start G code.
No, it should be in the NG code.
It should be in the end?
Yeah, let me take a look at what I've got in here for my Ender 5. Retract and raise Z, wipe out, raise Z more, absolute positioning. No, that's just for the end of it. This actually is something within Marlin, and unfortunately I don't know exactly where it is because it's on by default in 2.0.6 forward, roughly. And every time you hit cancel print, it goes back to its home position, and it turns off the heaters. And there's actually a setting you have to turn off if you want to turn... if you wanted to keep the heater and the bed warm, which is what I've done on a few of my machines when I'm debugging issues. I don't want to have to preheat it again and all that. But by default, in the new Marlins, when you hit abort, it moves the nozzle to a safe position, usually the home position.
Yep.
X0, Y0, turns off the heaters, turns off everything, and just leaves it parked there.
Yeah, and that's actually the way that it should do it, because you don't want plastic still to be dripping out of that hot end on your print. You want it to recognize where it stopped, write that little positioning onto the SD card so it knows where to go back to. So long as you haven't changed the position of anything, it should go back to the same spot. But yes, it is in the firmware. It's not in the G code. So check your firmware if you've got firmware for your printer. And if you need more details on that, please remember, and I got to bring this up, to send your questions to questions@thefirstlayer.com. If you send them to any place else, Brian at, Richard at, info at, chances are we're not going to see them because they will end up in our trash bin or our spam bin. So this questions@thefirstlayer.com. We take questions throughout the week and we try and answer them as best we can on our Sunday live shows. So we get your week started in a good way, we hope. And that's why we do what we do. We're not experts, but we've been doing this long enough to know that we can overcome most of the issues that you people may be having with your 3D printers. And there's all kinds of experts or hobby experts, hobbyists over on our Facebook group, which is the First Layer on Facebook, and you can go over and join there and post a question there. There's lots of people that can usually come up with answers. Ben Brady's a great mentor. He's been doing this a while as well, and he can mentor you through it if Brian and I don't get to it. And there's quite a few other people as well.
Super Chat.
We got a super chat from Joe LaRue, $5. Thank you very much, Joe. We do appreciate that. Every little bit helps. Honey, can you bring up the one before this again? Do you remember what it was?
No. Was it the middle of the bed thing?
Yeah, EDC 4MA. How do you level the middle of the bed? My corners are perfect, but the middle is way too close. There's no middle knob.
Okay, it's going.
Yep.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, you can't level the middle of your bed. Plain and simple. If you've got a hump in your bed and it is noticeable in your prints, and you know, if you're doing small stuff, like let's say you're doing a benchy, for instance, and you're doing small stuff. Let me come back to our regular camera here. If you're doing a benchy, for instance, and that's only a small surface area and it's pushing too much into the bed, yes, then you've got a hump. So my suggestion is to take tape, just like this tape over here. Jerry, can you throw me that roll? Thank you. Just some plain old painter's tape. Put it around the outside edge of your bed. If you've got a magnetic bed, you can still put this over the magnet, and the mating magnet will still seat properly. And that will lift up the edges so that it'll make it a little bit more uniform across the surface. And make sure that your bed is leveled correctly, and that should help you. There's never been a centering knob. Some people have tried to add centering knobs, but a lot of the time what you're going to do is you're going to end up ruining the traces on the bed if you try and do that. If it's dipped,
I nearly... My one almost printer fire was I had modified an aftermarket heating bed, and I drilled the holes a little too close, as it turns out, so I just went and bored the holes a little bit wider on the outside. Turns out they ran the traces within a couple millimeters of that, and I had energized my entire frame to be 24 volts. And that took one heck of a diagnostic, because I also had linear rails, and so the power conducted all the way through up to the hot end, and I was able to actually create little arc faults with the screwdrivers. So needless to say, it is possible to screw those up. You know, at the end of the day, the only way to get a purely flat bed is to try and hopefully get a good piece of glass, like a mirror, or to go and just reorder a brand new bed and hope that it comes in flat. I am going to try in the future here and take a piece of metal over to a CNC shop and have them CNC it to be flat, but that is not a cheap process. You know, we're talking a couple $100 usually for that. So the cheapest option may just be to buy a BLTouch, and if the hump is not too exaggerated, you can use this feature called fade leveling height, which starts out with your print at its bows and actually just slowly increments the differentials on each layer until it is printing flat within X distance, and you can adjust that distance based off how bad your warpage is.
There you go. So that's usually the best way to do it. And I have a CR-10S with Marlin 1.9. Can I make a copy of the Marlin on machine so that if it's possible, the Marlin update to Marlin 2 in case I have to go back to it? Usually what will happen is Marlin 1.1.9 you should have, and by the way, I like that old TRS-80 you got going on there in your photo.
Oh yeah, I love those.
I had one of those back in the day.
But too, actually.
You can usually download the Marlin flavor that you need for your CR-10S. It is usually what they've done. There are previous versions of 1.1.9 and 2.0 that are available for download. You just have to go into previous versions. But to get it off of the actual board is usually pretty difficult. Unless you understand machine language, and not a lot of people do. So getting it off the actual board and being able to read it and go back to it later is pretty tough.
And there's actually a command you can issue in Marlin. I'm just going to see if I can look it up. But when you type it in, here we go. Extended capabilities report. No, that tells us the firmware info. There's a command. It's similar to M115, and if anybody remembers in the chat, let me know here. But you can actually go and issue a G-code command, which prints out the information of which version it is. And there's another one that actually has all the settings. Just a little rusty on it, unfortunately. Emergency keep alive. There was something in the M110s that will actually print out all your status information about your configuration, like what your acceleration is, right? So we can tell you the acceleration is going to be 500 for a CR-10S. It's going to be a jerk of roughly 8 for good prints. I think they used to set it to 20 and it was too high. But you can also go to creality.com/download, select your printer type, and then it has different builds here. So they've got the latest firmware, and then they got one with BLTouch if you really need that original bin file to flash it back on. Oh, Pierre, M43S. Let's look this up here. Thank you so much for that. Oh, that's that one provides you with toggling pins. Or maybe I'm a little off here, but it does actually tell you. You can basically pull a bunch of information from your printer through all of these commands. And there used to be a welcome command. I wanna say it was like M. Honestly, I can't remember. There's so much G code in here, guys. So it's a lot to learn.
It is.
I don't read it too often outside of G0, G1 for moves and layers. But if you ever go to this Marlin for the documents for G code, you can learn exactly what your printer is doing at every step. And this is how, when you open a G code file in Cura, how it adapts it back to printer moves. So it's kind of fun to read if you ever have some downtime.
There you go. All right, so what is your thoughts on OctoPrint? Just ordered an OctoPrint kit with a Danish mod on called SimplyPrint. You can see it on simplyprint.io. My thoughts on OctoPrint: it's great for monitoring, and if you're away and you can set it up properly, that you can view it on your cell phone or whatever mobile device you have. It's great for being able to stop a print if something's going wrong and checking in on it. Other than that, I don't like any of the other features that are in OctoPrint other than just the monitoring and just being able to stop my print and shut the printer down. And the reason for that is because the way that it tries to integrate with the firmware in some printers doesn't quite mesh up. It's like dancing with two left feet sometimes. So if you try and cut or try and slice your model using OctoPrint and then sending it to your printer, let's say you're at the restaurant and go, oh, I got to start a print for, XYZ or for Jim or Bob or whoever, or even for yourself. I don't like doing that. I like to be there when I start the print, and then I'll go away. And then if I need to monitor it, I'll monitor it on my cell phone, just to make sure things are going correctly and that there hasn't been a huge layer shift that I can see, or that sort of thing. So at the end of the day, my thoughts on OctoPrint are great for monitoring, not for doing any real diagnosis or slicing, that sort of thing. I know some people swear by it. I don't, and I've had several machines that I've used it on, and again, it's like dancing with two left feet. Some Marlin setups on some printers just don't talk well.
And you don't even have to go through that whole route. If your goal is just to monitor it and you don't want it to take any action, get yourself a Wise Cam. They've been always cheap enough. I've been using them here. They got good night vision, so you don't have to have the lights on to watch your prints. And if I pull up my machine downstairs running away right now, you can see I can just sit here and watch it go anywhere in the world, whether I am at home, whether I'm on the go. I've just left night vision mode on all the time. I don't care too much about the color right now, and then that way I can just see everything with the infrared cameras. But as you can see, it's all high definition, 30 frames a second. And you can add an SD card in there to log the playback if you want to go back X number of hours and say, you know what, something went wrong, and see what went wrong. They're like they're $20 American on Amazon, and they're about $40 Canadian. They're not the cheapest up here. But you can also get, if you want to spend a little bit more, if you spend $60 or so Canadian, you can get yourself the pan and tilt model. And this one's the same thing, but it's got a motorized servo in the bottom, and this camera points up and down in addition to turning left and right. So you can actually remote look at multiple printers in the case of the room behind me, or I can look at all of my machines and I can zoom in close enough to at least see if something's going weird.
Joshua wants to know how to fix a bad STL file from Thingiverse. There's a couple of ways that you can do it, and the one way that I recommend that if you've got a bad file is take it into a program called Mesh Mixer. It is free to download. You can go ahead and download that from Autodesk's website. You just type in Mesh Mixer into your Google search. It'll take you right there. You can download it for, I believe, Windows, Mac, and for Linux. Download that, pull your STL in. There's several tools there that will analyze it and see where all the holes are and try and fill them in for you if you so choose to do that. Take a look at YouTube for some videos on that. We are going to be covering that as part of our initiative this year. We're going to get back to basics, and we're going to get into some more advanced topics this year as well. We got a couple of reviews coming out first, and then we're going to be jumping right into firmware. We're going to be jumping into slicers, because we've gotten a lot of questions about slicers over our last few live streams. So it really is going to be something that we move forward on. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to the last question of the day because it's quite long. So maybe I'll answer that one offline for this guy, or we'll bring it up next week. Maybe we'll bring it up again next week because we are out of time. Wow, this hour went really quickly.
Yeah, it's been we were all hyped up for this, and as you can tell, we're ready to do new content.
Yep.
I did promise you guys something, but man, what a stupid week. So I apologize. I'm gonna try and keep my promise and drop something here quick. On the review side of things, I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what's been going on. Is we try to provide vendors a little bit of leeway given the world events that have been happening this year, but the sad truth is we were not receiving adequate feedback, and it's a shame because we want to provide a review if something is really cool, but if there's really something show-stopping, we were trying to work with the OEMs so we didn't basically smear it. And the sad truth is we're not getting the answers back that we want, and we're going to have to, unfortunately, start posting some actual reviews so you guys know what you're getting yourselves into.
Yeah.
And what we're going to be doing, and this is with our heavy asterisks, is if we are harping on something, we will backtrack on it and provide an updated video if there is any changes to that situation. But what we have to look at is when we're receiving pre-production products, it's really hard to do a review on something because that may not be what you receive. And we saw this with the Ender 3s when they first came out, because we had the Ender 3, Ender 3 Special, Ender 3X, Ender 3 Pro, Ender 3 Pro X. Like you couldn't do a review on the darn machine because 1 week we'd be telling you, hey, it's fully serviceable. And then the next week, the same model with the same part number came out with clamped on gears instead of screw replaceable ones. So some people got them and said, well, I need to replace this motor and it's hydraulic pressured on. There's no way to get it off. So yeah, we had a heck of a year with products like that. So we are going to get back to regular content here. Reviews are not going to be our top priority unless something does come in that's really interesting. If you guys really like that live build, maybe we'll do that every occasional Sunday if there's no questions or a slow amount of questions, because what else can you talk about in a printer review these days? Yeah, it looks like an Ender 3. Yeah, it prints.
It prints.
There you go.
And with everything that's going on in the world, and Brian really hit the nail on the head here, is that not, and especially in China right now, because they're going to be going on holidays.
Oh yes,
very
soon.
Chinese New Year.
And they're going to be down for 2 to 3 weeks, and we're not going to see anybody. So
yeah, if you guys want to order something from China, order it now.
Yes,
because
yes.
Chances are you're not going to see anything before March if you order in the next couple of weeks.
So we have a couple of really cool things coming out in review in the next couple of weeks, and then we are going to dive right heavy into some small series of videos where we're going to be talking about slicers. We're going to be giving you a little bit more in-depth into some of the slicers. We're going to tackle firmware. We're going to show you how to upload firmware. We're going to show you the important parts in your firmware that you have to pay attention to. We're going to get all of this covered for you. We're going to cover finishing your models as well, but we've decided this year we're going to do them in small series. So it'll be 3 to 4 videos, and then we may end up doing recap videos as well. We don't know. We haven't quite decided that yet, but at the end of the day, we want to give you guys the best information, and from our experience, the best information that we know how. So we're still learning. We're always learning so that we can pass on the best information to you guys. Brian, I want to thank you for joining me here. I know it was kind of last minute today that we decided to do this.
We decided to rock this. And actually, just before we close it out, Ben Brady brought up a great comment. usually it takes doing a full review of a printer takes several weeks, and this is just to give you guys a little bit more of insight. The pressure we've been receiving for reviews has been hectic because there's times where they're expecting an under 7-day turnaround of a full review of their product from receipt of it to basically fully built and going. And many of these companies haven't provided any documentation. It has been very tough to paint to even look and find positives when, there was a certain printer that can do multi-purposes that I think we're still waiting answers on. And I've seen a few reviews pop up from them, and truth be told, maybe we just received a dud, but until we can get it working, how can you talk about the main feature of something if it doesn't work? Yeah. And, we're just trying to be respectful. We're not trying to paint a product in a falsely positive light. It's just, we want to ask the same questions up front that you guys ask. Let's say we got the best Ender 3 in the world, and it works great. And you go get home, and you open it up, and it doesn't print, and you contact the OEM, and they don't get back to you. Well, then how does that make it look for us? We told you this is a great machine, but your experience is not matching ours. So if we are having trouble, and if you watch shows like Linus Tech Tips and stuff, you see stuff like this a lot. If we have an issue, we're going to try and address it under the same space as you guys. And if we can't get an answer, why are you going to get an answer?
Yeah, exactly. So we want to give you guys the best information we can. We are going to be dropping some videos this year that may not paint the best light on some products because either we don't think they're useful or they've just, out of the box, they just have issues and people don't want to get back to us. So with that said, I want to thank you all for joining us today. We had a huge amount of people. The chat was super active. If you could please give us a thumbs up, a like in our checkbox there, like today's stream. Also,
write a comment after the show. We talk about chat and live chat, but what really, again, this is that weird YouTube algorithm thing we spoke about. Their analytics now are based off the comments, not in the live chat, but in the post-show comments, the ones underneath the video description. So if you don't mind throwing something down there, even saying Happy New Year, that will help us with YouTube analytics. As stupid as that sounds, it's odd. I have no answer for it. I'm not a businessman. I don't know how it works, but
I'm still trying to figure out the algorithms too. So at the end of the day, we do appreciate you guys for being a part of our family, and each and every one of you, whether this is your first time or you've been with us since the beginning, you're all part of our family, and we want to give you the best information that we can. So until we see you guys next week, remember that the first layer is always your foundation to a great print. Goodbye.
Bye for now, guys.
Bye.
Bye.